With that said, I'd like to introduce Peter Stebbins, and I want to thank you, Peter, for helping to pull this all together. Peter's with the Lily and Earl M. Pilgrim Art Foundation.
Hi, thank you for coming. My name's Peter Stebbins. I was born in 1965 in East Sheldon, Vermont, on a family farm that my great-grandfather established in 1871. But my Vermont ancestor came to Sheldon around 1810. He served in the Revolutionary War in Connecticut, and many of the towns in Vermont were actually established by higher-ups in the Revolutionary War. Colonel Sheldon, who was George Washington's chief spy, got the town of Sheldon. And when I was growing up, Ernest Tanner lived across the road from me. And he hung out on his porch, told stories, peed off the edge, and drank a lot of beer. And one of the stories that he told me that stuck with me was that cellar down by the river that the parents, our neighbors next door, use as a dump on the flat, which is where the river floods every year and gets silt and is fertile, is shared by my family and the parents. That cellar was a brick house, and a black man lived there. And over above Pierre's flat down at the river, there was a black community. I learned that, I don't know, I was like 8 or 10 years old, learning how to smoke a pipe with Ernest and hearing these stories. And my brother was part of this audience. And we told that story, and we never got any traction. In Vermont, then, and really probably now in a lot of schools, and if you look at the literature, the presence of black people in Vermont is referred to as Negro servants. The first person born in Sheldon was a black person, and she's described as the child of Colonel Sheldon's Negro servant. Never got any traction with this. I went to college at University of Vermont. I met David Bethuel Jameson. He was born David Jameson at St. Elizabeth's Hospital, where he was named by nurses. And at birth, he was removed and placed at Junior Village. David's mother and father, and I have some artwork to illustrate David's life. These are 3 paintings that form an allegory, and they've just come back. I catalog and organize and represent David Bethuel Jameson at the last studio house he had here in Washington, D.C. in Mount Pleasant on Walbridge Place. It was owned by Charles and Mason Jr. Hilda and Charlie were David's last foster parents. And Charlie placed that house in a trust dedicated to the display of David's art for as long as that display lasts, or I've brought the documents I want you all to read, or until the last of mine and Maureen Leake's lives. Maureen, David, and I were a triumvirate in our life and activism and artwork. These 3 paintings are over there under the table, and I need some help. So, one year in college, as Dave and I were trying to figure out, we'd both taken a year off because we were tired of it. Those were the years when UVM was the largest public institution with the largest endowment in South Africa, and we were involved in divestiture there. In 1985, David got James Baldwin to come there. If you go to our website, you can hear the recording, which the university has kept out of its archives. However, Dave, being Dave, knew that when the tape stopped rolling in Memorial Auditorium in April of 1985, he needed to run over to the student that had that job and say, "Make me a cassette now." You can hear it on our website, and it's on YouTube. So we were in Vermont. We took a year off because of all of that, and we're trying to renegotiate. What are we going to do? Where are we going to live? And Dave came up to the farm, and I told him the story. And we went down to the dump. And down at the dump, Dave found an old rusty bicycle, and he brought that back to the farm, back to the house. And then we went through that old barn that our family bought in 1871, and he took an old door out of that barn, and the bike and the door came to UVM, and he created, the bicycle was dipped in plaster that was glinty with pieces of glass so it sparkled and hung on a wall. And next to that, the door had a painting of Daddy door. We have postcards over at the cafe. That was 1986. Lily and I met, we met the summer of 1986 actually. We crossed paths in a gallery. Her husband was a Barbadian American artist, born and raised in New York, who was active in New York, Massachusetts, and he died in 1976. And the second year that David and I were on Cape Cod in Provincetown, because it was an art colony, the Provincetown Art Association showed Kind of Blue, 4 black artists with a 20th century impact on American art who had a presence in Provincetown, the oldest known American art colony. Years later, Lily and I partner in permanent public placement of the signifying works of our late partners. In 2016, Lily established the Lily and Earl M. Pilgrim Art Foundation. The inaugural experience was a trip to Oaxaca, Mexico, and then Havana, Cuba, and then Carras, Peru. And you know how I figured out what we were doing? By boots on the ground, looking at what was signified in those areas, and it was African culture and diaspora. And I realized, our number one dedication to Earl Pilgrim, our threefold mission: promote the visual art of the African diaspora, artists who do not achieve recognition during their lifetime, and best preservation and placement of our works. It all started to make sense. Lily died in 2017. She left $2.2 million entirely to her foundation to support this work. It was handled, the estate was handled by lawyers. Over 5 years, they extracted $500,000 from that $2.2 million, and they sold the stock investments. So that made us start out at ground zero. I went a lot to my community garden over at Fort Totten during that time. It was very hard. One day, I discovered, passing through Georgia Avenue Thrive, and I saw a sign. Posters and flyers are very important, everyone. I saw a sign, and it was calling for public artwork on traffic boxes. And I immediately thought of those 3 in front of the library, their triangular shape, Alan Uziki Nelson, and his placemaking that I learned about over 25 years ago when the Washington Post wrote about Alan Uziki Nelson's triangle parks. And I said, oh, we're gonna do that. Georgia Avenue is a historic corridor of Caribbean culture. This is where the Caribbean Fest was until it outgrew it. Now it's the largest Mid-Atlantic and I think Northeastern Caribbean festival in Maryland. The traffic boxes came up there. They came up at Kenyon and Georgia. They're being redone and an additional one is being added there. And we partnered with the Petworth Library for a program called It's a Small World After All. And it was 3 months of public sessions where I shared what I had learned from public records. And one that is such a great tie-in is Lily's family. Today, I refer to them as Middle East North African, MENA or MENA. They came from the Ottoman Empire. There was no Lebanon then. They described themselves as Lebanese Americans. So when I started this It's a Small World After All, this triangle, that triangle, this neighborhood, I wondered, how did Lily's dad buy this house? I mean, he kissed Jimmy Hoffa on the cheek. It's an AP article, you can find it. They did come from Detroit, that area. They then were in Niagara Falls. He was a beat cop, something went weird. He fought it all the way to the top. And then he ended up running corner stores here in DC. He bought that house up there with it's a wood frame house with a porch on it. In my research, I learned that that was one of maybe 5 or 7 properties in this neighborhood that didn't have racial covenants. The neighborhood was built for white people. So if you see an old house like that in this neighborhood, guess what? White people probably built that house too. But when they built the rest of the neighborhood, I don't know why, I'm not an expert. Tanya, got to look into this. Those houses didn't get the racial covenants that the new properties got. So when the Aswad and Tuma Middle East North African people, who, could we say, LBDNW, they got in here and they got that house. Lily didn't get to go to Roosevelt. She went to Central High. There's a lot to think about here. And this concept of these triangular parks.
I know that Central High is now Cardozo.
Thank you. Yes, yes, yes. Yes. And it's a magnificent building.
It is.
It's a magnificent building. But I bring all these things up to say that signs are really important. Stories are really important. Does anybody know the Medusa story? Medusa had the most beautiful hair in the world, and she was alone in Athena's temple. David's mother and his mother's husband, whom we call his father, they were separately from Chicago and North Carolina. They came as part of the black migration to the urban areas for opportunities. They met and fell in love. They went down to get a marriage certificate, and then they disappeared. And then a few years later, they came back and did it and got married. In the late 50s, early 60s, they suffered nervous breakdowns. They were institutionalized. They were lobotomized. So the woman with the beautiful hair in the temple and Ethel McCargo Jameson had experiences in St. Elizabeth and the temple of people in charge that came from elsewhere. For Ethel, it was the orderly. For Medusa, it was Neptune. These are 3 paintings that were done in 1987 at the Fine Arts Works Center. This is about 3 years into David Bethuel Jameson's serious practice and commitment to expressing himself and the world. The center painting is called, all capitals, very important, Mother. Mother has ropey dreads, much like Medusa. Mermaid, all 3 paintings are signed with the same inscription, a piece of collage handwritten. Mother and Mermaid are all capitals. Where is Neptune? Neptune is not depicted here. Equestrian refers to the rider of the horse or the person in charge of the carriage. Equestrian gets a capital E and a lowercase equestrian. Mother was bought by Dr. and Ruth Chacker that summer of 1987. Mermaid was bought this summer of 1988. Equestrian remained in the artist's studio. In 2022, a trauma psychotherapist whose late husband had bought Mermaid when they were lovers in the 80s in Provincetown. His late husband had died, and he was downsizing and could no longer take that painting. And it was donated to the Lily and Earl M. Pilgrim Art Foundation. And I'll tell you, our archival photographs were a picture of a gallery setting where the painting was on this wall, so I could only see a glazing image of it. So when I got this notice, there's a mermaid, I thought, Walt Disney mermaids. Yeah, no way, Dave did not do a mermaid. It wasn't until I saw it and was struck by that image, and then later realized a depiction by another artist in Provincetown of Thalassa, that mermaids, you know, standing on their tails, those are cartoons. They floated on their back, or they swam in the water. This mermaid is back floating and surrounded by sgraffitoed victims that aren't coming out in this poster, which I whipped off with ChatGTP just the other day. But Mother came back beginning last fall. A guy reached out as an agent for the owner, and it was very private and I couldn't figure it out. And finally, the foundation made an offer. Or the foundation met their offer with an acceptance that required provenance. And when we went to pick up the painting, and I could stand and look at Mother, and I realized right away he had the wrong title. He called it My Mother. No, it's Mother. And I did what most people do. You want to look at everything. You want to look at the back. And as I went to turn the back, he said, "Oh, I have to tell you a story." When the Chackers looked at this painting in the studio and had selected and chosen to purchase the painting, the studio assistant, who was, his name was Gerald, he was a young artist with Dave, and the studio assistant said, "Oh, wait, I have to tell you something," as they're turning around to look at the back. He said when the artist finished this painting, when David finished this painting, he had an emotional burst, and he stabbed the back of the painting. So I look at the back of the painting and I can see a little 3-corner chair. And I was Dave's main studio assistant all the years. That summer I was in a summer class and showed up late. It doesn't matter. When I saw it, I thought, a studio assistant, that's a good story. Because if you're operating on a stretched canvas and you're in a cramped artist studio, and you lean it somewhere and do something quick. It might be a table corner, and it might three-corner tear it. So I dismissed the story. I didn't know anything about the Checkers. We brought the painting back home, and I got more into the painting and related. And I learned, I told you at the beginning, that David was born at St. Elizabeth's and raised in foster care. I learned from the agent for the painting that the Checkers had adopted their children. And I learned that his relationship with the Checkers was the Checkers mentored he and his wife when they adopted their children. And when the Checkers both died, Fred first, Ruth second, Ruth left the painting to her adopted son. And he stored the painting with this agent who was mentored by the Checkers in adoption. So the painting comes home, and I'm looking at it, and I'm realizing the ropey hair and the Medusa, and Mother and Mermaid, the way they're in the gallery at Walbridge, are facing each other, and I can feel it. And then I go away, and I'm thinking about all the other work, which is, packaged, stored, etc. And I remember Equestrian, and I remember what a weird painting that is. And why is it equestrian? There's no man, there's no person in there. It's a seahorse. Well, it's a hippocampus. These paintings together showed that relationship in my mind, and I realized it's allegorical. This is the Medusa story. This is also Dave Jameson's story. But I still hadn't gotten this orientation. So they lived together until the president gave a talk to the nation recently. And I had a friend who we were hanging out all afternoon, and I don't know, a little bit before the president talked to the nation. Ed took a nap like 45 minutes before, and I was alone. And I thought, oh, the president's talking to the nation. There's a fireplace. I think I'll make a fireside chat and listen to that while I look at Mother, Equestrian, and Mermaid, and think about how they should hang. And there was a section in the president's speech where he said, "It'll come naturally." And I was thinking in that moment about these three paintings. He was talking about what he's doing. He was talking about Venezuela. He was talking about Iran. He was talking about Greenland. All of that stuff. And then I realized that red-tongued, toothy hippocampus that represents the equestrian, the rapist, needs to be over there on the right, coming at Medusa. And this product is there on the left. There are orange tickets on the table. There's nuts and raisins. Hilda would have wanted you all to get some of those. Each of those, take an orange ticket and please go to Cafe on 9th. They're our new partner. There's a long shelf in Cafe on 9th, and we have piled up all of the books, and they're free for you all to take. And I hope that if anyone takes a book, when they finish it, they'll bring it back or they'll pass it on. And Alan Uziki Nelson, placemaker, thank you. Thank you. And Crossroads, we're at the Crossroads. And Tanya, thank you so much. This is Sankofa. That's what we're experiencing. Thank you.